Hello everybody, Kieran aka the Retrolord here. Now some of you may remember that way back in issue 177, I say way back, it wasn't that long ago, but they did a Greatest Systems of All Time article. Now as it says here, it was called the Ultimate Poll, because what they did was they asked people on Twitter, Facebook and on their own forum what systems that they thought were the greatest ever, and compiled those results to come up with the article that is featured in this magazine. It was also reprinted recently in a bookazine as well. Now, there was no restrictions at all in terms of the voting of this article. You could go right from the earliest consoles up to new consoles. You could vote for add-ons as well. Basically anything that played games, pretty much. So they put the results in this magazine, and they did the top 30. And I don't want to show you the article because that's what this video is going to be all about. Now, they showed you the top 30 systems, and what originally looking at doing was the top 50. So obviously the first thing everyone did was say, well, where are the other systems? Now, some of you may not have seen this because they only actually posted this on the forum of what the other systems were in this issue. That didn't quite make the top 30. So in this video, I'm going to count down the systems from 50 right down to 1. So all the 30 that are in the magazine here, plus the 20 that didn't make it. So we've got a pretty good idea of what people voted for as the greatest systems of all time. Obviously, Retro Gamer is a UK magazine, so there would have been a slight British skew to the results here. But it is read by people all over the world. It was open to people from all over the world to vote. So it makes some interesting reading. I'm going to not witter on much longer, and I'm going to count down with you the top 50 greatest systems of all time as voted for by the readers of Retro Gamer. Enjoy.
So the first console on this list in 50th position is the Atari 7800. Which is probably most famous for being the world's first backwards compatible games console, being able to play all the games from the best-selling Atari 2600 library, as well as its own range of cool titles. Next on the list is the Philips Video Pack, or Magnavox Odyssey 2, depending on which side of the ocean you're from. Now this console is pretty interesting in the fact that it features a basic keyboard on the top of the unit for extended control options. In 48th position is the Mattel Intellivision. This was the first real competitor to the Atari 2600, and the most interesting thing about it is probably its famous disc controller, which many people credit as being the origin of today's joypads. In 47th position we have the very first handheld on the list, the Neo Geo Pocket. This handheld is pretty unique in the fact that it features a little clicky thumbstick as opposed to a joypad. This made it especially good for playing fighting games, which is what its big brother, the Neo Geo, was best known for. In 46th place is the ColecoVision. Another early competitor to Atari 2600, this was based on MSX technology and featured pretty advanced graphics and sound for the time. It was killed off far quicker than it should have been, but retains a great catalogue of games and a strong homebrew scene too. In 45th place we don't have a console, but we have an add-on, the Sega Mega CD or Sega Genesis CD, whichever side of the ocean you're from again. So this much maligned add-on is obviously quite well remembered by gamers, or it wouldn't have actually made this list in the first place. In 44th place is the Amiga 12000, the upgraded version of the Amiga that had a 32-bit processor, the new AGA graphics chip, and a host of new games, as well as being backwards compatible with the original Amiga. In 43rd place we have the Game Boy Color. A lot of people don't remember this Game Boy as well as the others, but it's clear that it still has a bit of a following because it's made the list, and people obviously remember some of its best games and still play them to this day. In 42nd place is the Commodore VIC-20. This was the computer that really set Commodore on the path to success, and also kind of cemented their position as being able to make computers that played great games, being able to play tapes, discs and ROM cartridges. It was a really good seller. In 41st position is the 3DO. This was one of the first generation of 32-bit consoles. It had some early success, but the high price put off a lot of gamers, and it disappeared pretty quickly once the PlayStation and Saturn came along. In 40th position we have the BBC Micro. The BBC was an educational computer that was really best known in the UK and not much anywhere else, but it still has quite a following to this day, and that's why it's got the position on this list. In 39th place we have the Xbox One, the first modern current gen console on this list. There are others, so obviously the current gen is still pretty fresh in people's minds, and although it's fallen behind the PS4, it's still selling pretty steadily. The MB Vectrix, a really unique console because it featured a built-in screen which also displayed vector graphics like you saw in the arcades with games like Tempest and Star Wars. This quirky console is now getting quite rare and hard to find, but it's an essential for any serious collector. In position 37 we have the MSX computer. This technology was originally created by Microsoft, but actually manufactured by a wide range of different companies, including people like Sony, Yamaha, Casio, Philips and many others. In 36th place we have the Sega Game Gear, another handheld for the list. The Sega Game Gear was basically a portable Master System, but it did end up getting some exclusive games of its own towards the end of its pretty long life. In 35th place we have the Atari 8-bit range of computers, including the 400, 800, XL, XE and XE game systems. This long-lasting but advanced for the time computer was first launched in 1979 and not discontinued until the early 90s. In 34th place we have the Atari Jaguar, a console that sold very badly originally, but is actually still very well remembered by gamers and has a cult following, hence why it managed to grab such a high position on this list above much better selling systems. In 33rd place is the PS Vita, a handheld that Sony have now sadly pretty much given up on, but gamers have always rated it very highly and have always hoped that they would have done a bit more to have got it moving and got it successful. In 32nd place is another much maligned console in the Wii U. Despite having backwards compatibility with the Wii that came before it, the console sold poorly, confused gamers with its name, and it wasn't long before Nintendo replaced it with another system. In 31st place is the Atari ST, the computer that truly started the 16-bit revolution and also had an incredible impact on the dance music scene thanks to its built-in MIDI ports and high-res monitor. In position 30 is another modern console in the Nintendo Switch. This quickly caught on with gamers and has proved hugely popular as a console and handheld hybrid, and continues to sell well and do what the Wii U couldn't do for Nintendo. In 29th place is the Atari Lynx, a hugely advanced handheld for the time. This has managed to finish higher on the list than many other systems that sold a lot better. This is testament to the Lynx's excellent catalogue of games and the fact that it's still a highly collectible system to this very day. In 28th place is the Amstrad CPC, an 8-bit computer that sold particularly well in the UK and France. It was unique for the time in that it came bundled with a monitor, unlike the rival Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum. It's still pretty popular amongst gamers to this day. In 27th position is the Nintendo 3DS. the most modern handheld on the list. This has been through multiple revisions and doesn't look like it's going to slow down anytime soon, as it still sells in very high numbers. Next up is the PSP, Sony's first attempt to enter the handheld market. This system was also pretty cool in that it played movies as well as games on its own special miniature CD format called UMDs. In 25th place we have that console everyone dreamed of kids, the SNK Neo Geo. The first system that truly was an arcade in your home, as the games were exactly the same whichever way you played them. The only problem was the extremely high price of acquiring the system and games. In 24th position we have the wonderful little PC Engine, a console that was also sold in North America as the NEC TurboGrafx. Sadly, this console was never officially launched in Europe, despite everyone hoping it would be. Poor us, because we missed out on a hell of a lot of great games. In 23rd place is the PS3, a console that saw Sony fall from their top position as it was overtaken by the Xbox 360. They pulled some sales back towards the end of its life, but they certainly learnt from their mistakes when launching the next console, which actually comes very next place on this list in 22nd, because it's the PS4, the console that got everything right that the PS3 got wrong. Started off the generation strong and has never looked back since, as it continues to outsell its nearest rival, the Xbox One. And back to the Xbox brand, because 21st place features the original Xbox Classic, Microsoft's first entry into the console market. It didn't sell in quite the numbers that they hoped, but it gave them a solid base to continue to sell consoles to us lucky customers. In 20th position is the Nintendo Wii, a console that did a lot better than most people actually expected it to, as it managed to grab a new slice of the market that people had never even thought of, with everybody, including your grandma, rushing out to buy one almost as soon as it was released. In 19th position, the Sega Master System, a console that sold extremely well in Europe but didn't do so well in North America. It features a great library of games and was helped by the fact that you could then play these games on the Mega Drive and Game Gear using special adapters. In 18th place is the Nintendo DS, the best selling handheld of all time. Nintendo DS was an evolution of Nintendo's original Game & Watch series with its double screens, and featured an incredible catalogue of different games. In the 17th place we have the granddaddy of them all, the console that launched an entire industry. The Atari VCS, later known as the Atari 2600, was on the market longer than any other games console ever built, an incredible 15 years, with the very last game being released in 1991. And in 16th place it's the PC. Hard to generalise this because PCs have been around since forever and are continue to be used for games to this day. So this encapsulates every PC from the days of DOS right up to modern day Windows and Steam machines. In 15th position is the Game Boy Advance, a system that seems to still have extreme popularity among collectors, has a strong homebrew market, and is the system that many describe as a portable SNES. In 14th place we have the Sega Saturn. Despite failing pretty spectacularly when compared to its rival, the PlayStation 1, the Sega Saturn actually does have an outstanding catalogue of games, and that's why it's still so fondly remembered by gamers and collectors to this very day, and appears so high on this list. In 13th position is the Nintendo GameCube, which once again showed that Nintendo weren't afraid to do things differently, with its small discs and design, and rather strange joypad. This gamble didn't pay off for Nintendo, as it sold much worse than all of the Nintendo systems that came before it. In 12th place we have the Nintendo Game Boy. and arguably the king of handheld game systems. Despite being technologically far behind its rivals, the long battery life and large catalogue of great games is what made this console successful and why it's still so well remembered to this day. And in 11th place you have that quintessential British masterpiece, the ZX Spectrum. Despite being far less capable than many of its rivals, its low price point, great availability of games on cassette, and easy to use BASIC meant that it pretty much revolutionised the computer industry here in the UK. And as we go into the top 10, we find the Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm sure that many would expect the NES to feature higher on this list, but you have to remember that despite selling very well in North America, it failed to capture audiences in the UK and Europe, which is why it's probably not so well remembered as some other systems. In 9th place we have a console that very much continued where Microsoft left off with the original Xbox, improving every feature further and really showing what was capable with online gaming on a console. The Xbox Live service is very much what put this console on the path to such huge success. And in 8th place we have the Commodore 64, a system that until quite recently was still credited as being the world's best selling computer, only being overtaken by the miniature Raspberry Pi. It still has a very strong following to this day and a particularly vibrant homebrew scene especially. And in 7th position we have the Nintendo 64. Many people were surprised to see this console feature so highly on this list, given the hate it seems to garner from many gamers. But the strong library of first party Nintendo titles are what's propelled this console to the top of this chart. And in 6th place we have the highest placed computer on this list, the Commodore Amiga. This system has an almost cult following, extremely hardcore fan base, and is supported by all sorts of upgrades and new software to this very day, which keep it in people's minds. And in 5th place we have the PS2, one of the best selling systems of all time. Despite its complicated hardware, it did feature backwards compatibility and an extremely large range of games that helped it continue to sell right into this decade. And in 4th place, the Sega Dreamcast. It's incredible really that this console features so high on this list, considering it's always been deemed as such a failure. But it just shows the hardcore following it has as Sega's very last home video game console. In 3rd place is the Sony PlayStation. I think many people would have tipped this one for number 1. And from here it's probably not hard to find out what finishes above it, because its large selection of games is pretty much unrivaled across any of the other systems on this list. And in position 2, it's the Mega Drive, which means it's lost the 16-bit war and finished behind the Super Nintendo. This personally would have been my pick for number 1, but it seems that some people did disagree, but there's no doubting what an extremely good console this is, with a great library of games. And in first place, as you now know, is the Super Nintendo, a console that continues to be hugely popular to this day, most recently demonstrated by the huge success of the little SNES Mini. But the question is, do you agree with its first placing on this list, and did you vote for it as your number 1? I'd love to know in the comments what you think, whether you think the SNES gets the deserved number 1 place, do you think something else should have been number 1, and what console that didn't make the list, or computer even, do you think should have made it? Were you a fan maybe of Philips CDI, the Amiga CD32, or perhaps a more obscure computer like the Acorn Electron or Commodore 16? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so get commenting right below, and I will see you all for another video very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.